My dad made us do calculus problems, standing on one foot at 5 a.m. every day. When I got into Yale with a full scholarship, he said, only Yale, Jacob would have gotten into all the Ivies. After I graduated with a creative writing degree and got a book deal, he and my Adderall-addicted brother destroyed all my manuscripts and wiped my laptop. Then he spent years hiring private investigators to stalk me, creating fake plagiarism allegations to my MFA program and breaking into my apartment, all while my brother created a blog claiming I stole his writing. My dad is the most achievement-obsessed person I've ever met. Ever since me and my brother Jacob were little, he would make us do brain training exercises every single morning at 5 a.m. We had to solve calculus problems while standing on one foot, and if we got even one wrong, we'd have to rewrite entire textbooks by hand. Our bedtime routine was literally reciting the periodic table backwards and practicing SAT vocabulary until we could define 500 words perfectly. And while I always felt sick doing it, Jacob was Dad's little genius machine. By 15, he was taking college courses, monitoring my study time with a stopwatch, and reporting me if I took a bathroom break longer than 3 minutes. And he'd created a point system where he deducted credits for every minute I wasn't studying. And instead of our dad being concerned that his teenage son was acting like a prison warden, he bought Jacob a $2,000 laptop to optimize his enforcement capabilities. And even though I hated how my dad wanted me to perform, I still wanted his approval. So I poured everything into trying to meet his standards. I studied until my eyes bled, took every AP class, never slept more than 4 hours. So when I finally got accepted into Yale with a full scholarship, my dad was the first person I told. Only Yale? I suppose that's acceptable for someone of your limited capabilities, but Jacob would have gotten into all the Ivies, was all he said before filing my acceptance letter in a folder labeled disappointments. The breaking point came a week later. I came home to find Jacob passed out at his desk, empty Adderall bottles hidden in his drawer. When I tried to talk to him about it, he actually laughed. Oh, these? They just help me maintain peak performance. It's actually really smart. Dad says successful people do whatever it takes to stay ahead. That's when I knew I lost him. But if that's what my dad wanted, then I figured I should at least try to make him proud. So in the summer before college, I enrolled in an intensive pre-med program just to get one single approving nod from my father. The program director, Dr. Wang, would quiz us during meals, made us study 18 hours a day, publicly ranked us every morning. I knew it was destroying me, but when I brought home my ranking certificate, my dad's face lit up. He even spoke to me without criticism for the first time in 3 years. Fast forward 4 years later, and I graduated with a degree in creative writing. I had been in therapy for months, found an amazing mentor named Professor Williams. She was the first teacher who celebrated my creativity, encouraged my passions, actually read my work for its merit, not its grades. So when Thanksgiving came around, I was actually excited. I thought maybe, just maybe, my family would see how happy I was. She kept reassuring me that pursuing my passion was success and that my dad would understand eventually. For a second, I actually believed her. So when I knocked on the door, I had more hope than ever. But Jacob was the one to open, and he looked like a skeleton of himself, twitching from stimulants, eyes bloodshot from all-nighters he could no longer sustain. My heart shattered, and I guess his did too, because as soon as he saw my published poetry collection, he gasped, "Oh my God, Mia, you're embarrassing our family legacy in public?" Professor Williams politely introduced herself and mentioned how proud she was of my book deal. That's when my dad's face went from fake politeness to pure rage. "A real Wang doesn't waste their potential on worthless hobbies," he hissed, while grabbing my book so hard he tore the cover. And that's when he noticed my MFA acceptance letter sticking out of my bag. "You ungrateful failure! You've destroyed everything I built for you," he then screamed while literally trying to rip up my manuscripts. Jacob jumped up and grabbed my laptop to delete my files while Dad kept tearing pages, except he was destroying them so frantically that paper cuts covered his hands. Professor Williams immediately called campus security while trying to pull them off me. I figured by this point my family would realize they were destroying my life's work, but no. My dad grabbed a lighter and held it to my manuscripts. "You destroyed my legacy. You were supposed to be a doctor." Meanwhile, my brother was formatting my hard drive and I couldn't stop screaming. Luckily, the police arrived fast, and by the time they stopped them, years of my writing were destroyed, and my laptop was completely wiped. By the time the adrenaline wore off, I was furious. My dad kept calling me. Professor Williams was telling me she's proud of me for breaking free and asking if I still wanted to pursue writing. But all the noise around me simply came in one ear, out the other, because I was going to have a creative career, and I was going to make my family back off, and make my family back off I did. The silence that followed felt heavier than any of their screaming. I stood in the wreckage of torn manuscripts and scattered paper, watching the police officers take statements from Professor Williams. My hands shook as I gathered what remained of my work, stuffing crumpled pages into my bag while avoiding the burn marks on some of them. Jacob slumped against the wall, his skeletal frame trembling from more than just adrenaline. The officers had confiscated my laptop as evidence, but I already knew the damage was done. Years of drafts, revisions, and completed manuscripts existed only in fragments now. Professor Williams placed a gentle hand on my shoulder as the officers prepared to leave. She handed me her business card with her personal number written on the back, promising to help me reconstruct whatever we could from her copies of my submissions. The officers informed me they would be in touch about pressing charges, but I barely heard them. My mind raced with the reality of what had just happened. The drive back to campus passed in a blur. Professor Williams insisted on taking me to her office first, where she pulled out a flash drive from her desk drawer. She had saved saved every piece I'd ever submitted for workshop, plus the recommendation letters she'd written for my MFA applications. It wasn't everything, but it was something. I spent the next 3 days in the computer lab, frantically trying to reconstruct my portfolio from memory and the fragments Professor Williams had saved. My fingers flew across the keyboard, powered by a mixture of fury and determination. Every time exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, I remembered my father's words about worthless hobbies and pushed harder. The calls started on day 4. First, my father, leaving voicemails that alternated between rage and manipulation. Then Jacob, his messages increasingly erratic as the hours passed. I changed my phone number, but somehow they got the new one within days. The harassment escalated quickly. My apartment building's security footage showed Jacob trying to break in while I was at class. The landlord called to warn me, and I immediately invested in new locks and a security camera for my door. I moved my reconstructed manuscripts to multiple cloud services and gave Professor Williams access to everything as backup. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, my father showed up at the English department. The secretary called to warn me he was demanding my class schedule and home address. Professor Williams intercepted him in the hallway, calmly but firmly explaining that he needed to leave. He responded by trying to convince her I was mentally unstable and needed intervention. I watched from around the corner as she handled him with professional grace, never revealing my location or schedule. When he finally left, she found me hiding in the supply closet and walked me to campus security to file a report. They promised increased patrols around the English building. The false reconciliation attempt came through my university email. My father wrote a lengthy message about how he'd reflected on his behavior and wanted to support my writing career. He even offered to pay for my MFA program. The email seemed perfectly crafted to hit every emotional button, apologizing for the manuscript destruction and praising my published poetry. Something felt wrong about the sudden change. I forwarded it to Professor Williams, who confirmed my suspicions. The email contained subtle requests for information about my current projects, workshop schedule, and which professors I was working with. She helped me craft a brief response declining contact while remaining professional. Jacob's attempts were less subtle. He created fake social media accounts to message my classmates, claiming I'd stolen his writing and published it under my name. Fortunately, my workshop peers knew my work well enough to recognize the lies. They blocked him and warned me about each new account. The breaking point came when I discovered Jacob in my apartment. I'd returned from a late workshop to find him at my desk, photographing the papers I'd left out. My new locks lay on the floor, clearly picked with the skills he'd bragged about learning from YouTube videos during his manic study sessions. I grabbed my phone to call campus security while backing toward the door. Jacob lunged for the papers, knocking over my coffee mug in the process. The dark liquid spread across my newest revisions, and something inside me snapped. I shoved him away from my desk, surprising us both with my strength. He stumbled backward, his dilated eyes focusing on me with disturbing intensity. His hands shook violently as he ranted about family honor and wasted potential. I recognized the signs of stimulant psychosis from my research for a character study. This wasn't my brother anymore, just a hollow version twisted by chemicals and our father's poison. Campus security arrived within minutes, finding Jacob trying to stuff my manuscripts into his backpack. They detained him while I surveyed the damage. I can't even imagine the pain of watching Jacob destroy himself with those pills, while their dad just encourages it as peak performance. The way Mia tried so hard to earn approval with that brutal pre-med program, only to finally find real support from Professor Williams, who actually sees her. Coffee stains covered several pages, but most remained salvageable. I'd learned to keep multiple copies of everything now. The officer asked if I wanted to press charges for breaking and entering. I hesitated, thinking of the brother who once helped me with math homework before our father's influence consumed him. But then I saw him trying to tear pages even while restrained, and I nodded. He needed help I couldn't provide. Professor Williams arrived shortly after, having been listed as my emergency contact. She helped me gather my papers while the officers dealt with Jacob. Her presence steadied me as I faced the reality that my family would never accept my choices. Over the following weeks, I developed an elaborate system to protect my work. Multiple cloud backups, physical copies in a safety deposit box, and everything password protected with two-factor authentication. I varied my routes to class and workshop, never establishing predictable patterns. My father's attempts grew more creative. He contacted the literary magazine that published my poetry, claiming I'd plagiarized the work. Fortunately, I had documentation of my entire creative process, including dated drafts and workshop feedback. The editor dismissed his claims and banned him from further contact. He then tried reaching out to other professors in the department, spinning stories about my mental health and academic integrity. Professor Williams had warned her colleagues, and they forwarded his emails to campus security without engaging. The paper trail grew thick with evidence of harassment. I threw myself into my writing with renewed intensity. Every story became an act of defiance, every poem a declaration of independence. My workshop submissions grew darker but more powerful, processing the trauma through fiction. My peers responded with overwhelming support and constructive feedback. The MFA acceptance letters arrived in March. I'd been accepted to 3 programs, including my top choice with a teaching assistantship. Professor Williams cried when I told her, pulling me into a fierce hug. She'd written recommendation letters despite my father's attempts to discredit both of us. I chose a program across the country, far from my family's reach. The distance felt like freedom, even as I grieved the relationships I'd lost. I spent spring break apartment hunting in my new city, using a pseudonym for all rental applications to avoid being tracked. My father made one final attempt the week before before graduation. He appeared at the honors ceremony rehearsal with Jacob, both dressed impeccably as if nothing had happened. Security intercepted them at the door, but not before I saw Jacob's condition had worsened. His suit hung loose on his skeletal frame, and his movements carried the jerky quality of someone pushing their body past its limits. They shouted about family disgrace and wasted investments as security escorted them out. I stood frozen until Professor Williams appeared at my side, reminding me that my real family was the community I'd built through my writing. The other honors students surrounded me in solidarity, and we continued our rehearsal as if nothing had happened. Graduation day arrived with heightened security measures. The English department arranged for me to enter through a side door and sit in a protected section. Professor Williams walked with me, her presence a shield against any potential disruption. I'd decided to attend, despite the risk, because I'd earned this moment. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I thought about the little girl who once recited the periodic table to earn her father's approval. She never imagined she'd find her worth in words instead of formulas, in creativity instead of compliance. The applause from my chosen family drowned out any lingering echoes of my father's disapproval. I spent the summer preparing for my move, systematically erasing my digital footprint and establishing new accounts under variations of my name. Professor Williams helped me navigate the legal system to obtain a restraining order against both my father and Jacob. The court dates were draining, but necessary for my future safety. My writing flourished in this strange period of simultaneous destruction and rebirth. I completed a novella about a woman escaping a cult-like family, channeling my experiences into fiction that felt more truthful than any memoir. Professor Williams connected me with an agent interested in representing emerging voices. The night before my move, I sat in my empty apartment surrounded by boxes labeled with my new life. My laptop contained reconstructed versions of everything my family had tried to destroy, plus new work born from the ashes of their betrayal. I'd saved every piece multiple times, backed up in ways they could never reach. I thought about calling my mother, who'd remained silent throughout the ordeal, but I knew she'd chosen her side long ago, enabling my father's tyranny through her passivity. The family I'd grown up with existed only in memories now, replaced by the one I'd built through shared passion and mutual respect. As I taped the last box shut, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. My father had found another way to contact me, this time offering to buy me a medical school admission if I abandoned my writing. I deleted it without reading to the end and blocked the number. Some bridges were meant to burn. The moving truck pulled away from my apartment complex just as my phone vibrated with an email notification. My heart sank when I saw the sender, the MFA program coordinator. The subject line made my blood run cold. Urgent, concerning your application materials. I fumbled with my phone, nearly dropping it as I opened the message. The coordinator explained that they'd received disturbing correspondence about my application, including allegations of plagiarism and mental instability. Someone claiming to be my academic advisor had sent detailed accusations, along with what appeared to be forged medical documents. My hands trembled as I immediately called Professor Williams. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the concern in her voice as I explained the situation. She assured me she'd contact the program directly to clarify her role as my actual advisor and refute the false claims. The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls and emails. Professor Williams worked tirelessly, sending official documentation on university letterhead, copies of her original recommendation letters, and timestamps proving when my work was first submitted to workshops. The program coordinator seemed sympathetic, but explained they had to investigate all allegations thoroughly. While Professor Williams handled the academic side, I focused on damage control. I contacted every program I'd applied to, warning them about potential false communications. Most were understanding, but one program had already received similar allegations and withdrawn my acceptance pending investigation. 3 days into my cross-country drive, I stopped at a motel in Nebraska. As I unpacked my overnight bag, I noticed my laptop was missing from its usual compartment. Panic flooded through me as I tore through every box and bag in my car. The laptop containing all my reconstructed work was gone. I retraced my steps mentally. The last time I'd seen it was at the gas station that morning. I'd left my car unlocked for just a few minutes while using the restroom. My father must have had someone following me, waiting for an opportunity. Fortunately, I'd uploaded everything to multiple cloud services the night before leaving. I used the motel's ancient desktop computer to check my accounts. My Google Drive was intact, but my Dropbox showed recent activity. Someone had tried to delete files, but the version history saved me. I immediately changed all my passwords and enabled every security feature available. The motel clerk knocked on my door around midnight, saying someone was asking for me at the front desk. Through the peephole, I saw a man I didn't recognize holding an envelope. I called the police instead of opening the door. By the time they arrived, the man was gone, but security footage showed him leaving the envelope under my windshield wiper. Inside was a printed screenshot of my latest manuscript with red ink corrections in my father's handwriting. At the bottom, he'd written a note explaining that he'd hired a private investigator to track my movements and would continue to monitor my career. He offered one last chance to abandon writing and return home to pursue medicine. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, drafting emails to establish a paper trail. I documented everything: the stolen laptop, the stalking, the false allegations to my MFA program. I sent copies to Professor Williams, campus security, and my new program's administration. The next morning brought a new crisis. My bank called about suspicious activity on my account. Someone had tried to access my student loan information and change the disbursement details. The security questions they'd failed were the only thing preventing them from redirecting my funding. I spent hours on the phone with the bank's fraud department, adding extra security measures and passwords. They traced the access attempt to an IP address in my hometown. I changed banks entirely, opening new accounts at a small credit union that promised enhanced security protocols. As I continued driving west, the attacks intensified. My publisher received anonymous letters claiming I'd stolen my poems from a family member. My social media accounts faced constant hacking attempts. Every few hours brought a new crisis requiring immediate attention. I reached my new city exhausted but determined. The apartment I'd rented under a pseudonym was small but secure, with good locks and a doorman who took his job seriously. I spent my first day installing additional security measures, a door brace, window locks, and a security camera that uploaded directly to the cloud. Her father hiring someone to steal her laptop at a gas station shows such a scary level of control. I feel so much relief that she had everything backed up in the cloud. What a smart thing to do when dealing with someone this determined to hurt her work and dreams. My MFA program orientation was still 2 weeks away, giving me time to establish myself. I visited the campus, introduced myself to the department secretary, and explained my situation to the program director. She was horrified but supportive, promising to flag any suspicious communications about me. Professor Williams called with good news. The investigation into the plagiarism allegations had concluded in my favor. The program recognized the harassment for what it was and confirmed my acceptance. She'd also connected me with a lawyer who specialized in harassment cases and offered to work pro bono. The lawyer, a recent graduate named Margaret Wang, no relation, thankfully, understood family harassment intimately. She helped me file for a more comprehensive restraining order that would cover digital harassment and third-party contact. The paperwork was extensive, but Margaret guided me through each step. Meanwhile, I established routines in my new city. I found a coffee shop with good security cameras where I could write safely. I varied my routes and schedules, never establishing patterns someone could track. I even dyed my hair and changed my style, anything to make myself harder to find. 2 weeks before classes started, I received a package at my apartment. The doorman called to confirm I was expecting a delivery from a literary magazine. I hadn't submitted to any magazines recently, so I asked him to refuse the package. He later reported that the delivery person became agitated and left quickly. My caution proved justified when another student in my program received a similar package the next day. She opened it to find a USB drive that immediately installed malware on her computer. The virus was designed to search for and corrupt any creative writing files. Fortunately, her antivirus caught it quickly, but the intent was clear. I sent a warning email to all incoming MFA students about suspicious packages. The program director followed up with an official security notice. Several students reported receiving strange emails or social media messages asking about me. My father's network was expanding, but so was mine. The weekend before orientation, I discovered someone had been calling local therapists, claiming to be seeking treatment for me. They'd spun elaborate stories about my mental health, trying to establish a false medical history. One therapist called me directly after becoming suspicious of the caller's insistence on documenting specific diagnoses. I spent hours contacting every mental health provider in the area, warning them about the false calls. Most were professional and understanding, promising to note the harassment in their records. Margaret added this to our growing file of evidence for the restraining order. My father's next move was more subtle. He contacted distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, spinning stories about my mental breakdown and pleading for them to intervene. My aunt called me in tears, convinced I was in danger. It took an hour to explain the real situation and convince her I was safe and thriving. Soon, my extended family divided into camps. Some believed my father's version, others supported my choice to pursue writing. The family group chat became a battlefield of accusations and arguments. I eventually left the chat, but screenshots kept arriving from cousins who thought I should see what was being said. Jacob's harassment took a different form. He created a blog dedicated to exposing what he called my theft of his creative work. He posted fragments of stories claiming I'd stolen them, though the writing style was nothing like mine. He analyzed my published poems line by line, finding hidden messages and plagiarism that existed only in his stimulant-addled mind. The blog gained traction in certain corners of the internet where conspiracy theories flourished. Strangers began commenting on my social media, accusing me of stealing from my brother. I had to make all my accounts private and block dozens of users daily. My first week of classes arrived with a mix of excitement and anxiety. I'd prepared extensively, backing up all my work in multiple locations and warning my professors about potential disruptions. The program director had briefed campus security, and they promised extra patrols during workshop nights. The other students in my cohort were welcoming and supportive. Word had spread about my situation, and they formed a protective circle around me. We exchanged numbers and created a group chat for safety check-ins. Their solidarity meant more than they could know. During our second workshop, the fire alarm went off. As we evacuated, I noticed someone photographing the emergency exit from across the street. The figure disappeared before I could get a clear look, but I reported it to security anyway. They found no signs of tampering with the alarm, but the timing felt suspicious. My writing flourished despite the chaos. The constant threat sharpened my focus, and my work took on new urgency and depth. My workshop submissions explored themes of family, control, and identity with raw honesty that resonated with readers. My professors praised my growth and vulnerability. Then came the email that changed everything. A literary agent reached out, having read my work in in the magazine my father had tried to discredit. She wanted to represent my poetry collection and thought there might be interest in a memoir about breaking free from family expectations. The opportunity felt both thrilling and terrifying. I scheduled a video call with the agent, but technical difficulties kept interrupting. My internet connection, usually reliable, kept dropping at crucial moments. My laptop's camera malfunctioned, then my microphone stopped working. I eventually called from my phone, but the interference pattern felt deliberate. Margaret helped me investigate and discovered someone had been war-dialing my internet provider, flooding them with service requests for my address. The constant changes to my account created the connectivity issues. We added internet harassment to the restraining order documentation. The agent, thankfully, was patient and understanding. We completed our conversation over several calls, and she officially offered representation. I signed with her agency, feeling like I'd crossed a major threshold in my career, despite my family's attempts to derail it. My father's response was swift. He hired a lawyer to send cease and desist letters to my publisher and agent, claiming ownership of my work as my former legal guardian. The claims were baseless, but the legal threats created hesitation in the publishing world. My agent had to hire her own lawyer to respond. While the lawyers battled, I focused on my coursework and writing. My thesis project evolved into a collection exploring generational trauma and the price of breaking family patterns. Every poem was both a personal exorcism and a universal story of liberation. The restraining order hearing finally arrived. I flew back for it, staying with Professor Williams to avoid detection. The courthouse felt surreal as I presented my evidence. Printed emails, security footage, documentation of the harassment campaign. Margaret presented our case methodically, building an undeniable pattern of behavior. My father arrived with his own lawyer, looking older but no less determined. He'd prepared a counter-narrative painting me as mentally unstable and himself as a concerned parent. Jacob sat beside him, thin and jittery, clutching a folder of his supposed stolen work. The judge listened patiently to both sides. When Jacob tried to present his plagiarism evidence, she asked specific questions about dates and writing processes that he couldn't answer coherently. His accusations fell apart under scrutiny, and his agitation became increasingly apparent. During a recess, my mother appeared for the first time since everything began. She looked exhausted, worn down by months of managing my father's escalating obsession and Jacob's deteriorating health. She approached me in the hallway, and for a moment, I thought she might apologize or offer support. Instead, she begged me to drop the case and come home. She insisted family problems should stay private and that I was destroying our reputation. When I refused, she turned away without another word. That silent dismissal hurt more than all my father's rage. The judge granted the restraining order with comprehensive provisions. My father and Jacob were prohibited from contacting me directly or through third parties, accessing my accounts, or interfering with my education and career. The order extended to digital harassment and included specific penalties for violations. My father's face contorted with rage as the judge read the decision. He shouted about wasted investments and ungrateful children before his lawyer quieted him. Jacob simply stared at me with hollow eyes, mumbling about stolen words and family betrayal. I flew back to my new city feeling simultaneously victorious and drained. The legal protection was important, but I knew it wouldn't stop someone truly determined. I maintained all my security measures and stayed vigilant about potential threats. My program colleagues welcomed me back with a surprise celebration. They'd pooled resources to buy me a new laptop with enhanced security features. The gesture overwhelmed me with its kindness. This was what chosen family looked like. People who supported your dreams instead of trying to control them. The next few months passed in relative peace. The restraining order seemed to have impact, and the harassment decreased significantly. I threw myself into my thesis, producing some of my strongest work yet. My agent began shopping my poetry collection to publishers, generating genuine interest. Then Jacob resurfaced in an unexpected way. A video appeared online showing him at a spoken word event, performing what he claimed was his original poetry. The support from her MFA program and new community is so heartwarming after everything she's been through. Margaret Wang sounds like exactly the advocate she needed, and those fellow students creating a safety network shows real kindness. The pieces were clearly my work, memorized from the manuscripts he'd photographed. The audience didn't know they were watching theft in real time. My workshop peers found the video first and immediately documented everything. We collected screenshots, timestamps, and comparison documents showing my original drafts predating his performance. Margaret added it to our file as evidence of restraining order violation. But something else struck me watching that video. Jacob looked terrible, worse than at the hearing. His performance was manic, words tumbling too fast, hands shaking as he gripped the microphone. He was destroying himself with stimulants, just as our father had destroyed him with expectations. I made a difficult decision. Instead of pursuing legal action for the violation, I contacted an addiction counselor who specialized in performance-enhancing substance abuse. I sent them the video and what information I could share, hoping someone might intervene before it was too late. The counselor couldn't tell me much due to confidentiality, but they thanked me for the information and said they'd reach out to Jacob. Whether he'd accept help was another question, but I'd done what I could while maintaining my boundaries. My poetry collection sold to a respected independent publisher. The advance wasn't huge, but it was mine, earned through my work and perseverance. My agent negotiated a contract that protected my rights and ensured my father couldn't claim any ownership or proceeds. The announcement triggered another wave of harassment, though more subtle this time. Anonymous reviews appeared on literary websites claiming insider knowledge knowledge of my plagiarism. False social media accounts spread rumors about my mental health. Someone kept signing me up for medical school information sessions. Each attack felt more desperate than the last. My father was grasping at straws, trying to find something that would stick. But I'd built strong foundations, documentation of my work, supportive colleagues, professional relationships that couldn't be shaken by anonymous accusations. My thesis defense approached with mounting excitement and anxiety. I'd poured everything into this collection, transforming pain into art that spoke to universal experiences of breaking free. My committee praised the work's evolution and emotional depth. The defense itself went smoothly until the public question period. A man I didn't recognize stood up and began asking pointed questions about my family's influence on my work. His queries grew increasingly personal and aggressive until the committee chair intervened. Security escorted him out, but not before he shouted that I'd stolen everything from my brother. Later investigation revealed he was a private investigator my father had hired to disrupt my defense. The attempt failed, but it reminded me that vigilance was still necessary. I passed my defense with distinction. My committee praised not just my work, but my resilience in creating it under such difficult circumstances. Professor Williams attended, tears in her eyes as she watched me achieve what we'd worked toward together. Graduation approached with bittersweet anticipation. I'd succeeded despite everything, but the joy was tempered by the absence of family who should have been celebrating with me. My chosen family would be there, but the empty spaces still ached. A week before graduation, I received an unexpected call. My aunt, the one who'd initially believed my father's lies, had been watching everything unfold. She'd seen the restraining order documentation, witnessed Jacob's deterioration, and finally understood the truth. She offered to attend my graduation as family representation. The gesture meant more than I could express. Having one blood relative who chose to support my path felt like a small redemption of all I'd lost. My publisher planned a book launch for the week after graduation. Pre-orders were strong, and several literary magazines wanted to interview me about the collection. My agent fielded requests carefully, screening for any that might be harassment in disguise. The final week of my MFA program was a whirlwind of readings, celebrations, and goodbyes. My cohort had become true friends, bonded by workshop vulnerability and mutual support. We promised to stay connected, to read each other's work, to celebrate future successes. Professor Williams flew in for graduation, bringing a gift that made me cry, a leather-bound journal inscribed with, "For your next chapter." Inside, she'd written a note about how proud she was of my journey and growth. Her mentorship had saved me in ways she'd never fully know. The graduation ceremony felt surreal. As I walked across the stage in my cap and gown, I thought about the girl who once solved calculus problems on one foot for approval. She'd found her own definition of success, one measured in metaphors and line breaks instead of test scores. My aunt sat in the audience, tears streaming down her face as she clapped. Around her sat my chosen family, Professor Williams, Margaret, my workshop peers, my agent. Their presence filled the space my biological family had abandoned. After the ceremony, we gathered for dinner at a restaurant near campus. Stories flowed along with wine, laughter replacing the tension I'd carried for so long. My aunt pulled me aside at one point, apologizing for not seeing the truth sooner and promising to support my writing career however she could. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by boxes again, preparing for the next phase. My publisher had arranged readings in several cities, and I'd accepted a teaching position at a community college. The future stretched before me, full of possibility and free from my father's shadow. My phone buzzed with one final message from an unknown number. This time, instead of threats or manipulation, it was Jacob. The text was simple. "The counselor helped. Getting clean. Sorry for everything. Your poetry is yours. Be well." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt, at least not yet. But knowing Jacob was getting help eased something in my chest. Maybe he could still find his way free from our father's poison. I packed the last of my belongings into storage, knowing my father would find any permanent address I established. The teaching position at the community college started in 2 weeks, but I'd learned to stay mobile. My manuscripts lived in encrypted cloud storage with offline backups scattered across 3 states. The first sign of renewed trouble came through my publisher's assistant. She forwarded an email from someone claiming to be a literary critic interested in reviewing my collection. The writing style felt familiar, the questions too specific about my family background. I recognized my father's phrasing hidden beneath academic language. I instructed the publisher to ignore all review requests that didn't come through established literary channels. They agreed, having dealt with enough harassment to understand the situation. My agent implemented similar screening procedures, turning away interview requests that probed too deeply into personal history. My new apartment sat above a busy restaurant, the constant noise providing cover for any unusual sounds. I installed motion sensors that sent alerts to my phone, keeping the windows locked despite the summer heat. The building's multiple exits gave me options if needed. During my first week teaching, campus security noticed someone photographing the faculty parking lot. The description matched the private investigator from my thesis defense. I started parking in different locations each day, entering through various buildings to avoid patterns. My students knew nothing of this drama. To them, I was just another young professor teaching composition and creative writing. Their enthusiasm for storytelling reminded me why I'd chosen this path, their fresh perspectives healing something my family had tried to break. The escalation began subtly. My office nameplate disappeared, replaced with one reading Dr. M. Wang, despite my lack of doctorate. Someone kept leaving pre-med brochures under my door. The janitor mentioned finding someone trying keys in my office lock after hours. I moved my office hours to the library, conducting meetings in public spaces with security cameras. My department chair, informed of the situation, arranged for my office to be in the interior hallway without windows, small accommodations that made teaching possible. My father's next attempt came through official channels. The college received a formal complaint alleging I'd falsified my credentials. Attached were documents claiming I'd never graduated, that my MFA was fraudulent. The registrar had to contact my previous institutions to verify my degrees. While the administration handled verification, I focused on my students. Their writing improved week by week, their confidence growing as they found their voices. One student wrote about escaping and controlling family, and I had to excuse myself from class to compose myself in the bathroom. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. My mother called from a number I didn't recognize, her voice barely above a whisper. She spoke quickly, warning that my father had hired someone to plant substances in my office, planning to report me anonymously. I thanked her curtly and hung up, immediately alerting campus security and my department chair. They searched my office with me present, finding nothing, but installed a lock that recorded every entry attempt. The next morning, security footage showed someone jimmying the lock at 3 a.m. before noticing the camera and fleeing. My publisher moved up the release date, hoping to get the book out before any major disruption. The launch reading would be small, invitation only, at a bookstore known for supporting local authors. I gave them a security list, photos of my father and Jacob to watch for. 3 days before the reading, Jacob appeared at my classroom door. He looked healthier but still gaunt, his movements less frantic but uncertain. I positioned myself near the emergency button as he entered, keeping the door open. He placed a thick envelope on my desk without speaking. Inside were handwritten apologies, documentation of our father's harassment plans, and screenshots of emails between our father and various private investigators. His hands trembled as he backed toward the door. I watched him leave without acknowledgement, then immediately photographed every document. Margaret would need these for strengthening the restraining order. The evidence showed my father had spent thousands trying to sabotage my career, hiring people across multiple states. The reading approached with mixed emotions. My first book, a dream realized despite everything. Professor Williams flew in again, bringing several former classmates. My aunt arrived early, helping the bookstore staff arrange chairs and check names at the door. An hour before the event, the bookstore's alarm system mysteriously activated. Police arrived to find no break-in, but the disruption meant canceling the reading. The owner apologized profusely, offering to reschedule, but I recognized the pattern. Instead, we moved to Professor Williams's hotel suite. 20 people crammed into the space, sitting on beds and floors as I read from my collection. The intimate setting made the words more powerful, the small audience more connected. My aunt wept during the poem about family expectations. That night, I made a decision. I legally changed my name, choosing my grandmother's maiden name that my father had always dismissed. The paperwork took months, but it severed another tie to his control. My publisher agreed to use only my initials for future editions. The community college renewed my contract for the full academic year. My students' evaluations praised my teaching, their final portfolios showing remarkable growth. I found stability in their eagerness, purpose in their development as writers. My father's attempts grew desperate. He created a website dedicated to exposing my supposed fraud, posting fabricated evidence of plagiarism. He contacted literary bloggers, offering exclusive interviews about his ungrateful daughter. Most ignored him, but some picked up the story before fact-checking revealed the truth. I responded by living well. My classes filled quickly, students drawn to my approach. I started a writing group for faculty and staff, building community within the college. My poems appeared in respected journals, each publication a quiet victory. The restraining order violations piled up, but prosecuting them would mean returning to my hometown. Margaret filed reports for documentation, building a case if needed. The paper trail grew thick enough to prove patterns of harassment to any future employer or publisher. My book sold modestly but steadily, finding readers who connected with themes of breaking free from family expectations. The reviews focused on the work itself, not the drama surrounding it. I did a few carefully vetted readings, always with security present. One morning, I arrived to find my office door slightly open. Nothing was disturbed, but a medical school application sat centered on my desk. The violation of space felt worse than any direct confrontation. Security reviewed footage but found nothing. The cameras mysteriously offline during that hour. I taught my classes that day with shaking hands, refusing to let fear show. My students deserved better than a professor distracted by personal drama. We workshopped stories about resilience, about characters overcoming obstacles through determination rather than confrontation. The semester ended with student readings. They performed their work with pride, families applauding their growth. I sat in the back, watching their confidence bloom. This was what mattered, not my father's endless campaigns or Jacob's deteriorating loyalty. Summer brought a temporary reprieve. I taught online courses from various locations, never staying anywhere long enough to establish patterns. My writing flourished in this nomadic period, new poems emerging from the constant movement. The agent called with news of international interest in my collection. A small press in Canada wanted translation rights. The advance was minimal, but the validation felt enormous. My words would exist in another language, beyond my father's reach. I returned for fall semester to find my office nameplate corrected, my books shelved properly. The maintenance staff mentioned finding someone trying to access the building after hours, but new security measures had kept them out. I thanked them and settled into teaching. My second book took shape during office hours, written in fragments between student conferences. The themes evolved from escape to building new life after trauma. My editor expressed enthusiasm for the direction, suggesting a spring publication date. The harassment became background noise. Fake reviews appeared and were removed. False social media accounts spread lies, then vanished. My father's money funded an elaborate campaign that achieved nothing but documentation of his obsession. I focused on what mattered. My students submitted work to literary magazines, some getting their first acceptances. The writing group expanded, hosting readings for the campus community. I guest lectured in other departments, building bridges across disciplines. Winter arrived with news that Jacob had entered long-term treatment. The information came through my aunt, who'd maintained distant contact with my mother. I felt relief but no urge to reach out. Some relationships couldn't be salvaged, only mourned. My life settled into rhythms of teaching, writing, and careful vigilance. The security measures became routine, the precautions automatic. I found joy in small victories, a student's breakthrough, a poem accepted by a prestigious journal, a colleague becoming a friend. The spring semester brought new students, fresh voices eager to tell their stories. I guided them through the same journey I'd taken, from silence to expression. Their growth reminded me daily why I'd chosen this path despite its costs. My father's campaign sputtered, running out of steam and money. The investigators stopped appearing. The false reviews slowed. Perhaps he'd finally accepted defeat, or simply found the expense unsustainable. Either way, the quiet felt strange after years of constant assault. I published my second collection to stronger reviews and sales. The launch reading happened without incident, a normal literary event in a bookstore filled with supporters. Professor Williams attended again, beaming with pride as I read new work born from survival. Teaching became my anchor. Each semester brought students struggling with their own family expectations, their own dreams dismissed as impractical. I offered what Professor Williams had given me: belief in their voices, encouragement to persist, practical tools for protection. My apartment finally felt permanent. I hung artwork, arranged bookshelves, created a home rather than a hiding place. The security measures remained but felt less urgent. I'd built a life they couldn't destroy, no matter how hard they tried. The final message from my father came through a lawyer. He was relinquishing all claims to my work, ending his campaign, focusing on his remaining family. The letter felt hollow, another manipulation rather than genuine surrender. I filed it with the rest of the documentation. I taught my classes. I wrote my poems. I lived my life. Thanks for reading this story with me.